The deepest maternal line shocked scientists because it ranked human continuity, not human worth. That difference mattered. When geneticists tried to arrange modern populations by ancient-rooted DNA, the old map looked ready to give an answer. Homo sapiens began in Africa. Some groups stayed near the oldest homeland. Others moved through the Near East, into Europe, Asia, Oceania, and eventually the Americas. The deepest surviving genetic branch should have been easy to name. Then, the mitochondrial tree gave a tighter answer. Inside the cell, outside the nucleus, a small ring of DNA passes mostly from mothers to children. It does not tell the whole story of a person. It does not carry all ancestry, but it can preserve one line with unusual clarity, like a thin red thread running through thousands of generations. That thread led to haplogroup L0. L0 is not a crown. It is not a prize. It is not proof that one population is better, purer, stronger, or closer to some imaginary original human form. The shock was something else, and it was more serious. A maternal branch still carried by living people sat closer to the root of known human maternal ancestry than most viewers would ever expect. That is where the first model broke. Before the ranking can be trusted, the word oldest has to lose its most dangerous meaning. In genetics, oldest does not mean better. It does not mean smarter, healthier, tougher, more legitimate, or more human. It means a genetic branch split closer to the root of a tree, or that a line kept deep continuity through a long stretch of time. A branch can be ancient without turning the people who carry it into ancient relics. Every living population is modern. Every living person is equally human. Mitochondrial DNA is useful because it follows one narrow path. Most of your DNA sits in the nucleus, mixed from both parents, shuffled every generation. Mitochondrial DNA sits in tiny energy-making structures inside cells. Because it usually passes through the maternal line, scientists can compare changes in that small genetic record and build a tree of mother-to-child inheritance. Those changes are mutations. Most are harmless spelling changes in the genetic code. Over time, they build up in different family lines. When many people share the same pattern, geneticists call that pattern a haplogroup. A haplogroup is not a tribe, a race, or a destiny. It is a branch label on a genetic tree. On that maternal tree, L0 sits very close to the base. The caveat matters here. A ranking of mitochondrial lineages is not a ranking of populations by worth. It does not measure intelligence, beauty, moral value, land ownership, cultural value, or future potential. It cannot tell anyone who they are allowed to be. It cannot turn a DNA result into a political certificate. It can answer a much narrower question. Which maternal lines branch deepest among those still known today? Once that moral trap is removed, the old migration map can be tested against the genetic tree, and the map begins in a familiar place. With the simpler version, many people learn from school books, museum walls, and television diagrams. Modern humans emerged in Africa. The exact process was not one clean moment. Fossils from places such as Jebel Irhoud in Morocco, Omo Kibish in Ethiopia, and Herto in Ethiopia show that early Homo sapiens was already spread across different parts of Africa, deep in prehistory. The dates are measured in hundreds of thousands of years, not in the short timeline of nations or languages. The textbook version then moves forward. Some human groups remained within Africa. Others left the continent, probably through corridors connecting northeastern Africa to the Near East. Their descendants spread into Europe, across Asia, into Sahul, the Ice Age landmass that included Australia and New Guinea, and later into the Americas. That version is not false. It is incomplete. Geneticists compare several kinds of evidence to sharpen it. Mitochondrial DNA follows maternal lines. Y chromosomes follow many paternal lines. Whole genomes carry the vast mixed archive inherited from both parents. Ancient DNA, taken from bones and teeth when preservation allows, lets researchers compare living people with people who died thousands or tens of thousands of years ago. Each record has limits. Each one also sees something the others can miss. In 1987, a Nature study by Rebecca Cann, Mark Stoneking, and Alan Wilson compared mitochondrial DNA from people across different geographic regions. The popular name that followed was mitochondrial Eve, a phrase that caused confusion almost at once. It did not mean there was only one woman alive at the time. It meant that all known living maternal lines trace back to one common maternal ancestor somewhere in the deep past, because other maternal lines eventually ended. Some mothers had only sons, some daughters had no children. Some lineages vanished during famine, migration, disease, or simple chance. Over many generations, the maternal tree narrowed. Later research changed the details, added more samples, and corrected early limits. Whole genome studies gave a fuller view than mitochondrial DNA alone. Ancient DNA turned the field from a set of inferred trees into a record that could be pulled from petrous bones, teeth, cave remains, and burial sites. The old map gained more roads. Still, the basic direction held. The deepest known maternal branches were African. Later branches spread with later migrations. Many non-African maternal haplogroups descend from branches within the broader African L tree, especially lines that pass through bottlenecks, as small groups moved away from the continent. That bottleneck matters. When a small group leaves a larger population, it carries only part of the original diversity. Imagine a huge library. Then imagine a few books carried across a desert. The books are real, they matter, but they are not the whole library. This is why some populations with long regional continuity can look ancient in one genetic line, while populations shaped by repeated migration can carry lineages that look younger or more mixed on a particular tree. Younger looking does not mean less important. Mixed does not mean corrupted. Often, it means a population stood at a crossroads. Europe is a clear example. Ancient DNA has shown repeated layers. Ice Age hunter-gatherers, early farmers from Anatolia, steppe pastoralists from the Pontic-Caspian region, and later historical movements. The result is not one pure branch, it is a layered archive. Asia shows the same problem in a different pattern. Ancient Northern Eurasian ancestry, East Asian lineages, South Asian deep structure, Siberian expansions, island Southeast Asian movements, and later steppe migrations all left different signals. Oceania adds another layer, including Denisovan ancestry found at elevated levels in Papuan and some indigenous Australian-related populations. The Americas carry the imprint of founder events. The first peoples entered from Northeast Asia through Beringia and then spread rapidly across two continents. Their lineages are ancient in the Americas, yet many maternal branches trace back to an earlier Asian source. Most of this fits the broad out-of-Africa model. Then the maternal tree points to the branch near the root. Haplogroup L0 is the point where this ranking frame stops being simple. On a mitochondrial tree, L0 is not just one African line among many. It is one of the deepest surviving maternal branches known. Other major African maternal lines, including L1, L2, and L3, sit on related branches of the tree, and L3 is especially important because lines descending from it are connected to many non-African maternal haplogroups. But L0 sits near the base, closer to the root of the surviving maternal record. That is the partial payoff. The deepest line is not a vague label called African DNA. It is a specific maternal branch. L0 appears most strongly today in parts of southern Africa, especially among Khoisan or San-related populations, though it is not limited to one single community, and no modern population can be treated as frozen in time. Southern Africa is not a museum case. Living Kho, San, and related communities have histories, languages, political struggles, family stories, and modern lives. No living group is a fossil. That sentence has to stay close to the evidence. A person carrying L0 is not an unchanged remnant from the beginning of humanity. Their ancestors lived through the same forces that shaped everyone else: marriage, movement, conflict, survival, adoption, hunger, climate shifts, and cultural change. A deep maternal line can remain, while the rest of the genome changes many times. Still, the line itself is extraordinary. Picture the mitochondrial tree as a dark screen with a glowing trunk at the bottom. Near the base, one branch cuts away early. That branch is L0. Farther up, other L branches divide and divide again. Some remain within Africa. Some eventually connect to the maternal lines that left Africa and became common in Europe, Asia, Oceania, and the Americas. The picture is simple. The meaning is not. If a ranking asks which maternal lineage is deepest among living people, L0 belongs at the deepest end of the chart. It preserves a mother-to-child record that reaches unusually close to the root of known human maternal ancestry. That is why it shocked people who expected a simpler answer from a schoolbook map. But a mitochondrial branch is only one line. You have thousands of ancestral lines only a few centuries back. Your mitochondrial DNA follows one of them. It ignores your father's mother, your mother's father, and nearly every ancestor whose DNA helped make you. It is powerful because it is clean. It is limited for the same reason. That would make the answer look simple, except a deep maternal line is not the same thing as a complete ancient population. The second layer was stranger. Ancient-rooted DNA does not mean one isolated tribe preserved the whole original human genome. Early Africa was not a single village waiting to send one branch into the world. The evidence points to a much more complex continent, with multiple, deeply diverged human populations living across different regions, sometimes separated for long periods, then reconnecting through migration and mixture. That picture is harder to draw on a classroom wall. A simple tree has one trunk and clean branches. Human ancestry looks more like a river system seen from above. Channels split. Some dry out, some run underground, some reconnect far downstream. Mitochondrial L0 marks one deep channel, but the larger African record contains many channels that are only partly visible. Whole genome studies made this clearer. When researchers compare entire genomes from coson-related populations with other African and non-African groups, they often find very deep split signals. These signals do not mean one group stopped changing. They mean some ancestry components diverged from other human ancestry components very early, then survived into the present through living communities. The evidence points in a more exact direction. Southern African hunter-gatherer-related lineages preserve some of the deepest known structure in the human family tree. That structure appears in mitochondrial DNA, but it also appears in broader genome comparisons. The maternal line was the proof object people could see. The whole genome showed that the story was not only maternal. In studies from the 2000s and 10s, including work published in journals such as Nature and Science, researchers used whole genomes to test how different populations relate to one another across hundreds of thousands of genetic markers. The results repeatedly showed that Khoisan-related ancestry branched very deeply compared with many other living lineages. Again, this is not superiority, it is branching depth. A deep branch can be small today, a shallow branch can be widespread. A widespread branch can carry huge cultural influence. A rare branch can carry genetic history that almost disappeared from the record. None of those facts creates a hierarchy of human value. The human story gets even less tidy when ghost populations enter the frame. A ghost population is not a supernatural claim. It is a missing source inferred from DNA. Scientists see patterns in living or ancient genomes that cannot be explained by the sampled groups alone. The source population left descendants or traces, but researchers do not yet have enough fossils, bones, or ancient genomes to name it confidently. Africa almost certainly had many such unsampled ancient lineages. This should not be surprising. Ancient DNA survives poorly in many warm and humid environments. Heat breaks DNA down. Acidic soils destroy bone. Tropical and subtropical regions can erase genetic evidence that colder caves preserve for tens of thousands of years. Europe and Siberia are overrepresented in ancient DNA, partly because preservation was kinder there, not because human history mattered more there. The genome kept one more record. Outside Africa, the public learned to think about archaic DNA through Neanderthals and Denisovans. In 2010, researchers at the Max Planck Institute published a draft Neanderthal genome and showed that many non-African people carry Neanderthal ancestry. That same year, DNA from a finger bone in Denisova Cave revealed a different archaic group, the Denisovans. known at first from almost nothing but genetic evidence. Those discoveries changed the human tree. The old story said modern humans replaced archaic humans after leaving Africa. The genome showed contact. It showed mixture. It showed that the branches crossed. Neanderthal ancestry entered many non-African genomes. Denisovan ancestry became especially visible in parts of Oceania and some Asian populations. For many viewers, that was the shocking twist. Humans were not a clean ladder. But Africa had its own deep complexity. It simply did not preserve in the same dramatic way, with a famous cave finger bone and a named extinct population. Instead, some signals appear as deep structure, unsampled sources, and lineages that split long before later populations formed. That is where the old map failed. If L0 sits near the root of the maternal tree, it points toward a time when early human populations were already structured. They were not one uniform group. They likely lived across different ecological zones, from southern African landscapes to eastern African corridors, and other regions still being studied. Some groups met, some separated, some vanished as distinct populations while leaving ancestry behind. This makes the deepest line more meaningful, not less. L0 is not the whole origin of humanity. It is one surviving maternal branch from an older, wider African structure. Khoisan-related deep signals are not proof that one living population equals the first humans. They are evidence that some living populations preserve unusually deep ancestry components from early human diversity. The strongest reveal is not that one group is the oldest people on Earth. The strongest reveal is that the root itself was never as simple as the diagram. The deepest maternal line points beyond one haplogroup, toward a lost structure of ancient Africa that textbooks rarely show. The first human story was not one clean trunk rising from one spot and dividing neatly into races. It was a continent of old branches, vanished branches, surviving branches, and later reconnections. That is the part most rankings hide. A chart can show L0 at the deepest end. It can show later maternal branches rising above it. It can show migration arrows leaving Africa and spreading across the planet. But the chart cannot show the whole human cost behind the survival of that line. Living communities carry rare archives of human history. Those archives belong to people. They do not belong to museums. They do not belong to laboratories. They do not belong to YouTube titles. They do not become public property because a haplogroup is old. A blood sample or saliva tube may contain a genetic record, but the person who gives it has a family, a language, a land history, and the right to dignity. This matters sharply for Ko and San communities. Southern African indigenous peoples have faced displacement, violence, land loss, labor exploitation, and centuries of being described by outsiders as if they were specimens instead of human beings. Some languages have been pushed toward extinction. Some communities have had their identities simplified by governments, researchers, and popular media. A genetic ranking can repeat that harm if it turns living people into symbols. The caveat matters here. To say that L0 is ancient is not to say that a person with L0 ancestry is more ancient as a person. The lineage is ancient. The human being is modern. Their phone, their vote, their job, their grief, their humor, their family argument, and their future are not less modern because one maternal branch reaches deep into prehistory. The same warning applies to consumer DNA tests. Many ancestry reports compress African diversity into broad categories. A result might say Southern African, East African, West African, broadly Sub-Saharan African, or another label shaped by the company's reference panel. Those labels can be useful for recent ancestry. They can also flatten the deepest diversity on Earth into a few colored blocks on a screen. A person might carry a rare maternal line and never know what it means. Another person might carry no L0 at all and still have deep African ancestry through countless other lines. Mitochondrial DNA is one thread, not the whole cloth of descent. This is why the ranking must be read carefully. If someone sees L0 near the root and turns it into a purity claim, they have misunderstood the science. If someone sees it and imagines a hierarchy of humans, they have stepped outside the evidence. If someone uses it to decide who owns identity, history, land, or dignity, they are asking a maternal marker to answer questions it cannot answer. The responsible meaning is narrower and stronger. L0 shows that a deep maternal record survived. It shows that some living people carry a line that reaches close to the base of known maternal ancestry. It shows that African population history contains depths that many simplified maps barely show. It also shows how easily the most important evidence can be hidden inside a broad label. The title's shock only makes sense when the ranking is read as continuity, not hierarchy. Scientists did not find a population above other populations. They found a surviving maternal branch near the root of the known human maternal tree. That is a very different discovery. It does not place one group on a throne. It places one lineage closer to a branching point that all living human maternal lines ultimately share. That distinction keeps the truth from turning into a myth. When the ranking begins, many viewers expect a contest. Which population is oldest? Which group stayed pure? Which line is closest to the beginning? Those are dangerous questions when they are asked carelessly, because they smuggle moral language into genetic measurement. The better question is more precise. Which genetic line preserved the deepest known continuity? For mitochondrial DNA, haplogroup L0 is one of the clearest answers. It survives most visibly in parts of southern Africa, especially among Khoisan-related populations. It branches near the base of the maternal tree. It points back toward a period when early human populations in Africa were already diverse, structured, and separated enough for deep genetic differences to form. Then, the later story reconnects those branches. Some African lineages expanded. Some mixed. Some disappeared as distinct groups but remained as traces in other genomes. Some branches contributed to the people who left Africa and populated the rest of the world. Outside Africa, those descendants later met Neanderthals, Denisovans, and other ancient groups. Inside Africa, other deep population structure remained, much of it still harder to see because ancient DNA is difficult to recover there. The old family tree bends under that evidence. It is still useful to say humans came from Africa. It is still useful to describe migrations out of Africa. It is still useful to build trees from mitochondrial DNA and whole genomes. But the tree cannot be imagined as a clean pole with neat racial branches. The root is older, wider, and more braided than the simple drawing suggests. That is why the deepest line shocked everyone. Not because it named a superior people. Not because it found an untouched human original. Not because it gave modern politics a genetic weapon. It shocked people because it showed that one surviving maternal record sits close to the root, while the fuller origin story looks less like one trunk and more like several ancient branches that later reconnected. The genome did not give a crown. It gave a warning about simple stories. A hospital form can reduce blood to a type. A DNA app can reduce ancestry to a colored map. A classroom chart can reduce human origin to one arrow leaving Africa. But the mitochondrial tree preserves another image: mothers, daughters, migrations, losses, bottlenecks, and chance, one generation after another, carrying a small ring of DNA through time. L0 is one of those records. It is not the whole record. It is not the first woman standing alone. It is not a living fossil marker. It is a surviving line from an ancient maternal tree, still present because enough mothers had daughters, and enough daughters lived long enough to pass it on. That survival is the real shock. The deepest line is not a crown, a prize, a purity claim, or racial proof. It is evidence of continuity under pressure. It is a record of mothers whose names are gone, movements whose trails are buried, and populations whose full histories may never be recovered from bone. If this kind of evidence matters to you, subscribe to the Genome Archive for careful genetic history, ancient DNA mysteries, and the parts of the human record most people never learn to read. The genome remembers survival, mixture, loss, and return. No hierarchy, no purity myth, only evidence, continuity, and memory.